And when the movie came out, it was such a disservice to Henry. Because that theatrical cut that released on March 26, 2016, that 2.5-hour cut of the 3-hour opus of Zack Snyder's BvS Dawn of Justice, that half hour that had been chopped, a lot of it was Henry's subplot. A lot of it was the stuff that would have helped you to understand what Clark Kent's mentality was behind, what was going on with Clark, with why he had such distrust over Batman. A lot of what was cut was part of the justification for why these two heroes would even fight. Because remember, that was the big uphill battle this film faced with mass audiences right out of the gate. Because look, the fanboys were going to be there no matter what. The geeks and the fanboys were always going to want to check out Batman and Superman fighting because it's the kind of geeky fight and conversation we've all been having for decades and decades. Who would win? And can Batman outsmart Superman? And does he have kryptonite arrows? And all these silly little hypotheticals, right? The geeks, the fanboys, the nerds, we were going to be there no matter what because we all know what's going to happen. Right? All of us who know the comics, who know the general outlines for these characters, we know that any movie that's called Batman versus Superman is not going to be a movie about seeing them fight to the death. It's going to be a movie where they have a disagreement, but ultimately come to the same side and go against a common enemy. We all know that. But for mass audiences, it was always going to sound a little strange to have these two beloved heroes, these two perpetual good guys, fight each other. And it wasn't like what was going on over in Marvel, where they had already been setting up for a while that Iron Man and Captain America both look at heroism very differently. And there were seeds of dissension being planted from the moment those characters met each other. They were like oil and water. So by the time we got to Captain America Civil War, where you have these two heroes butting heads, it had been built to, and you could understand, oh, wow, okay, these fundamental differences are going to lead to a crazy conflict before they ultimately bury the hatchet. But for most outsiders, you hear Batman versus Superman, and you're like, well, I'm going to need to be sold here. I'm going to need to believe that there's some reason on God's green earth where Superman would want to punch another human being. You know, because we know Superman is all about restraint and all about trying to help and all about trying to inspire and aid others. This idea that he could ever be so irrationally upset at another human being that he would want to punch them, like that's a tall hill to climb. You have to convince people that Superman would want to do that, especially since most people love Batman. Batman's one of the most beloved pop culture figures. You know, this is like trying to have Donald Duck fight Mickey Mouse or Bugs Bunny. And it's like these are beloved, iconic figures. That's like, why are you trying to have them fight? But in trying to get them to fight, there were scenes put in there. Chris Terrio did his best. There are some funny quotes out there that I've read on previous podcasts where, you know, he also thought that this idea was outlandish and insane, but he had to make the most of it. And he had to bring as much heft to the script as possible to get you to understand why Clark would go to this dark place and why Bruce was in this dark place. And yet, when you see that theatrical cut of Batman versus Superman, most of the focus is getting you to relate to Bruce Wayne, Batman. Very little of it is trying to get you to relate to Clark Kent, Superman. And it's just, this was supposed to be the sequel to Man of Steel. And here you are with Henry Cavill's Superman basically being treated somewhat like a villain. Because when you look at the world from Bruce's vantage point, Superman doesn't look so hot. He really doesn't. He doesn't come off that heroic in BvS. And the fact that the theatrical cut of the movie let that version be the version of Superman that everyone sees, it's just such a slap in the face. Henry Cavill's Superman was never able to recover from that. He was never able to recover from BvS. He was never able to recover from that line where he says, no one can stay good. He was never able to recover from the nightmare sequences where it looks like he's trying to burn Batman to death with his glowing eyes. Like, that's just not what people want from a Superman story. It is not the visuals that people think of when they think of Superman.